Welcome back to Lifespan Development. Here we're going to talk about some research in lifespan development topics. We'll discuss methods for collecting data, research designs, time span of research, and conducting ethical research. So observation is one way that we can do research in this area. Through a laboratory setting, this is controlled. Many of the complex factors of the real world are absent, so there's pros and cons here. If you're controlling for outside factors, then you know what you're studying is probably what you're really studying, right? There's no outside factors kind of interfering. At the same time, if all of the factors of the real world are absent, maybe it's not the best way to observe or figure out things about how people are acting in the real world, right? So something to consider. Naturalistic observation is a great option for observing behaviors in real world settings. This is where researchers go somewhere and observe what's happening without making any efforts to manipulate or control the situation. So in a laboratory setting, we might be setting up an experiment where we're manipulating one factor to see what kind of result we get. With naturalistic observation, we are not interfering. We're just seeing how something plays out. One example might be going to a gym and watching how many people of what different presumed age groups use a treadmill versus an exercise bike. That would be naturalistic observation. We're not changing anything, we're just observing and collecting data. Surveys and interviews are other ways that we can collect data here. So a survey is a standard set of clear and unbiased questions used to obtain people's reported attitudes or beliefs about a particular topic. Sometimes we call these questionnaires. Either way, same instrument. Also in this course, if I say instrument, I'm probably talking about a tested and proven survey that can be used to figure out a specific piece of information about a group or about people. So when I say instrument, it basically means that something has been tested to show that it's actually gathering the information that we're trying to gather. For example, if you wanted to figure out some information on depression and you made up some questions that you thought might get you that information, that's not necessarily a terrible approach, but there's much more reliable measurements available and measures available for us to use. So we can go and use a proven set of test questions that we know, because over time it's been tested again and again, that these questions are good at determining if someone is dealing with some symptoms of depression. Interviews are pretty standard. Interviews are where we ask people to self-report. This could be in person, this could be online, this also could be delayed. It might not be live. We might have people answering questions that way. There are also some challenges with these two options. Surveys are by far one of the least expensive ways to get information, but we don't know who's filling it out. We don't know if they're telling the truth. We might not be able to get a good read on if the right people are really filling out our survey, so that's a challenge there. Also, with interviews, people might be saying what they think they want us to hear. We don't know if they're telling the truth. Also, sometimes if we're talking about uncomfortable topics, people are just not okay talking about the things we're asking about. So those are challenges with those measures. We also use standardized tests. These are tests that are administered and scored using uniform procedures to compare performance across people. Case studies are another option, but these are an in-depth look at a single individual or small group. Usually they're used for some sort of very specific thing, maybe a rare illness, and although that gets us super valuable information about that specific case or that small group of cases, that information is not always helpful or applicable to the general public because not everybody has that challenge. So there's great things that we can do with case studies, but they don't really apply to the entire population. Physiological measures that we can use would be measuring things like hormones, like cortisol. We could do neuroimaging or fMRIs. We could do heart rate calculations. We could do eye tracking or gene testing. Descriptive research is a type of research that is designed to observe and record behavior. Correlational research attempts to determine characteristics between two or more events or a relationship between two or more factors. A correlation coefficient is a number that's based on statistical analysis that is used to describe the degree of association between two variables. This ranges from -1 to +1. The higher the correlation coefficient, regardless of its being positive or negative, the stronger the association is between the two variables. That being said, just because they have a strong correlation does not mean they cause each other. One example that I like to give of this, that's been given millions of times, but I think it's a great option, is ice cream. More people eat ice cream in the summer. More crime gets committed in the summer. Crime doesn't cause people to eat more ice cream, or people eating more ice cream doesn't cause crime. But if you look at the correlation of those two things, they both absolutely go way up in the summertime. So it's something to think about. So just because there's a strong correlation doesn't mean the two factors are causing each other. An example of this would be an observed correlation. So permissive parenting, as permissive parenting increases, child self-control decreases. This is a correlation. But there's possible explanations for this observed correlation. Permissive parenting, maybe that's caused because the child has kind of a lack of self-control, and permissive parenting is a way of that parent kind of coping with that child's kind of emotional state. A child's lack of self-control could cause permissive parenting, right? Maybe it goes the other way. Maybe the child being kind of off the wall is again, maybe that parent is kind of being permissive to kind of handle that. I'm not saying this is good or bad. We're just talking about this as an example. A third factor could be genetic tendencies or poverty. Permissive parenting and children's lack of self-control as factors, maybe the guardian or parent is not around as much as they could be because they're working, right? Maybe there's less parental input than would be ideal, but that would technically qualify as permissive parenting, but it's not really on purpose, right? So we're not saying that parenting causes the lack of self-control. Maybe that third factor, the fact that maybe parent or guardian is not around as much as in other situations, maybe that's part of a factor, right? So we can't say it's literally the parenting. It might be the presence, right? We don't know. So basically, this is showing that there could be a few different cases where events seem to be correlated, and they both happen in the same situation, but it doesn't mean they cause each other. There are other possibilities that the second event causes the first, or a third event causes the correlation between the first two, right? It's kind of all mixed up. It's not really, it's not a way that we can determine for sure what's going on. We just know those two things sometimes happen at the same time. So correlation doesn't equal causation, right? We talked about this a little bit a minute ago. Let's talk about correlation and what it means a little bit more in depth. Exercise is associated with less severe depression. However, it would be a mistake to conclude that exercise causes less severe depression. Severely depressed people might not have the energy to exercise. It could be that some third variable affects the other two variables. Interacting with other people during exercise might be what's affecting the depression, not the exercise itself, right? We don't know. We don't know for sure. So when we do correlational research and this correlational coefficient, this is a statistic that provides this number that tells us how closely the things are related. Values of this may range from -1 to +1, like we mentioned before, and each coefficient indicates the direction of the relationship and the strength of the relationship. So a positive relationship is indicated by a correlation value that falls between 0 and 1. A negative relationship is indicated by a correlation that is between 0 and -1. And so all this means when we say positive relationship or negative relationship, in both of them, these two things are happening at the same time. But in the positive relationship, as one variable goes up, the other variable goes up. In a negative relationship, one variable goes up, the other variable goes down. So in this example, we say for a positive relationship, perhaps the more a student studies, the higher their grade ends up being. In a negative relationship, we would say the more television a student watches, maybe the lower their grades are. So TV watching goes up, grades go down in the negative relationship. Whereas in the positive relationship, as the student studies more, their grades go up more, right? So both things are going up as opposed to opposite. So the strength of this relationship is determined by this basically math problem, but the 0 indicates that there is no relationship and they don't change together, either positive or negative. So hopefully that helps this to make sense for you all when we get into looking at some different studies and things for our project for the course. Hopefully this helps us if we're reading a study and they talk about correlation. Experimental research is a carefully regulated procedure where one or more of the factors believed to influence the behavior being studied is manipulated, while all the other factors are held constant. Experimental research is designed to study causality. So that's causation, right? We're trying to figure out what's going on, what's actually causing the thing. The independent variable is a manipulated, influential, experimental factor that is a potential cause. The dependent variable is a factor that can engage or that can change in response to changes in the independent variable. So the independent variable, it's something you, the researcher, or I think I, the researcher, change. Dependent variable is what we measure and what we see if there's a difference once the change has been made. Experiments can involve one or more experimental groups and one or more control groups. A control group is a comparison group that serves as a baseline. Random assignment is an important principle in experimental research. Participants are assigned to experimental and control groups by chance, whenever possible. So in this graphic, the participants are randomly assigned to experimental and control groups, and it branches into independent variable, which is the experimental group, and the control group. And it finally branches into dependent variable. So in this study, imagine you're deciding to do an experiment to look at the effects of meditation by pregnant women on their newborns' breathing and sleeping patterns. You randomly assign pregnant women to experimental and control groups. The experimental group women engage in meditation over a specific number of sessions and weeks. The control group does not. Then, when the infants are born, you assess their breathing and sleeping patterns. If the breathing and sleeping patterns of newborns whose mothers were in the experimental group are more positive than those of the control group, you can conclude that meditation caused some sort of positive effect. Now let's go over the time span of research. There's a cross-sectional approach. This is a research strategy that compares individuals of different age at the same time. Think of it like taking a picture at any moment in time, one moment. The longitudinal approach would be a research strategy where we are looking at the same individuals over a period of time, usually years or more. So maybe your cross-sectional approach would be looking at people in their 20s, their 30s, their 40s, all at once. The longitudinal approach, alternatively, would be you watching people in their 20s all the way through their 30s and then into their 40s. That longitudinal approach, think long time, right? We're watching them or studying them for a long time. Then we have cohort effects. These are characteristics determined by a person's time of birth, their era or generation, rather than their actual age. Here's a chart talking about generations, their historical periods, and some characteristics. For Gen Z or post-millennials, this is individuals born in 1997 or later, and they're more immersed in a technological world, especially social media, more ethnically diverse, and better educated than some millennials. Millennials were born between 1981 and 1996. This is the first generation to come of age and enter into emerging adulthood, which is about 18 to 25 in the 21st century, the new millennium. So two main characteristics here. They're connected to technology and ethnically diverse. Then Generation X. This is individuals born between 1965 and about 1980. They are described as having maybe a lack of identity. They are very savvy, but they are they are more likely to be loners than other generations. Baby boomers were 1946 to 1964, and this label was used because this generation was the spike in the number of babies born after World War II. This was the largest generation ever to enter into late adulthood in the United States. Then the silent generation. This was individuals born between 1928 and 1945. Children of the Great Depression and World War II, they're described as conformists and very civic-minded, thinking about the big picture. So you could see how people born in these different age groups might have a different perception of the world or a different perspective of the world than other generations, right? It's not saying that anyone is correct or incorrect. It's just showing that maybe that cohort, that age cohort, makes a difference when we're thinking about participants for some of our studies. Conducting ethical research is also very important. Although there are many different things we can cover about the ethics of research, and we will later in this course, today we'll just talk about these main 4 issues. We must have informed consent. The participants must know what their participation will involve, and they must be able to withdraw at will. Confidentiality is also important. Data must be kept confidential and, when possible, anonymous. Debriefing is also key. After the study, participants should be informed of its purpose and methods. And deception. When necessary, deception may be used, but, huge but, the psychologist must ensure it will not harm the participants and that the participants will be debriefed about what was really being studied. Now, let's talk about a quick example about how deception in research might be permissible. One example might be if I was going to study students in a classroom. I was going to watch someone else's classroom while they were teaching. And I'm telling the students, I'm watching them to see something about what the teacher's doing, right? I'm not really watching them. And I sit at the back of the room. And during that course or during that class, I count the times people leaned on their hands, or I count the times people took notes or something else like that. Well, I would kind of deceive them, right, by telling them I'm watching the teacher. But at the end of the class, at the end of my study, I am required to tell them what was happening and why I deceived them. And the reason I would be deceiving them in that moment wouldn't be to harm them, right? No harm is going to come to them. But if I told them, hey, I'm going to count how many times you take notes, of course, they might take more notes or less notes than they would have if they didn't think I was watching. Also, same with leaning on their hand, right? You might subconsciously kind of think as you're adjusting in your seat, maybe you lean on your hand a little bit on your desk. But if I tell you I'm going to be watching to see what's happening and how many times people are doing this, you're going to be very conscious of it. And that defeats the purpose of finding how much it happens randomly. One concern that we have when we're looking at research is that we understand that research on lifespan development needs to include more people from diverse ethnic groups. When looking for studies for your project, please be aware of ethnic gloss. This is a term that means there's ethnic labels used in a superficial way that portrays an ethnic group as being either more homogeneous than it really is, or the samples are not representative of the group's diversity. So just be cautious of this. If you're looking up something in your research about like social interactions or the impact of some sort of stereotyping, like we need to make sure that the study was done with a variety of people that meet the criteria for what we're looking to work on for our project. Sometimes studies are billed or like explained as diverse or whatever, and really maybe they're not diverse if the people, the diversity that is in the study is not representative of what you're looking at for your paper, right? So see how many people are in the study, what are the ethnicities of the people in the study, and what is the income of the people in the study. Like we won't know specifically, but we can look at what part of the country it was done in or what country it was done in. We can see some different information there. So we just need to be cautious if we're going to write about some cultural kind of differences. We need to be mindful that when we're looking up our research, we're being really careful that we're finding research that accurately represents the group that we want to talk about. So if you're looking for scholarly sources, seek out studies that note all the details so that you know you're getting great information about your topic.